Welcome to this special virtual event with the Australia-Israel Chamber of Commerce and the Israel-Australia Chamber of Commerce, Israel Trade Commission and MySecurity Media. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor and Director for MySecurity Media, and we are with the National Cybersecurity Strategy Impacts and Realignment 2020 Insights from Australia and Israel. I would like to welcome our special guests, and we are having a slight technical issue, but we'll be welcoming Mr. Yigal Unna and the Director General for the Israel Cybersecurity National Cyber Directorate, and Feakin, Dr. Tobias Feakin, the Australian Ambassador for Cyber Affairs and Critical Technology. Given that we are in Sydney, Canberra and in Perth as well, I'd like to give an acknowledgement of country to the Noongar people in Perth, to the Ngunnawal people in Canberra, the Gadigal people in Sydney. We pay our respects to our traditional owners and their leaders, past, present and emerging. For our agenda this afternoon, here in Australia at least, just for the agenda for this session, we're going to hear some opening welcome comments from our event partners, and then also in terms of the online protocol, we will be running a panel session and a Q&A. So we do welcome your questions from the audience. You can raise your hand, please type in your question. This session is also being recorded. If there are media registered and attending and intend to represent themselves or their outlets, please raise your hand also and identify yourselves. We'll be happy to take media questions and I'll moderate that as best I can. The session time will be on time at 75 minutes. We'll be finishing off 1/4 the hour, but we'll tend to have this session between 60 and 75 minutes. Now, I'm going to hand over to Mr. John Kluwer, the CEO for the AICC WA. John, please, if you could give your welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome all. We're delighted you've managed to join us today as we continue the AICC's tradition of conducting cybersecurity leadership events. They say that timing is everything, and today it couldn't have been a better day to conduct this event, given yesterday's latest news announced by the Australian government of the $1.35 billion package to fight cyber attacks. Today you're in for a very special treat with our most highly credentialed speakers, Yigal Unna from Israel, and representing Australia's perspective, Dr. Toby Feakin. So on behalf of the AICC and our event partners, being IACC, being ITC, the Israel Trade Commission, and MCM, which is MySecurity Media, thank you. Thank you for giving your time today, Yigal and Toby, and to MySecurity Media in our moderator today, the debonair Chris Cubbage. Thanks for your time in putting this together. Now, for anyone new to the AICC, we are simply a B2B matchmaking organisation open to all. We have no religious affiliations. We operate in all major Australian capitals and, of course, Tel Aviv through the IACC. And we brokerage Israeli know-how into Australian businesses and government, and we have a prominent presence in Australia with high-profile events such as today's. Our bilateral trade and intellectual exchange between Israel and Australia extends to many sectors, and one of which being a dedicated emphasis on cybersecurity. And we had the honour of conducting a trade delegation from Australia to Israel in 2016, led by the then head of ASIO, David Irvin. There's a picture of the delegation, We continue the exchange between both countries today with this AICC Counterpart event. To our illustrious audience of over 260 people, it's my pleasure to welcome you today and sincerely trust you find this webinar informative and most stimulating. Now it is my pleasure to hand over from Perth to Tel Aviv to my counterpart in Israel, Paul Israel, to say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you, John. On behalf of IACC Chairman Major General Yigal Unna, I want to commend you, John, the IACC, and webinar partner MySecurity for putting this event together. It's been a real pleasure working with you both, and it's great to see so many people registered from both countries. For over 2 decades now, John has led the IACC in WA to become a respected and widely recognised business network, and his efforts in promoting Australia-Israel trade are formidable. And as he mentioned, over 4 years ago, we brought our first ever cyber delegation from Australia to Israel. I'd like to make special mention of a guest we have on today's webinar, former Prime Minister, the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull, whom we had the pleasure of hosting in 2005 as a newly elected MP, and then in 2017 as PM. The IACC acknowledges how Malcolm Turnbull put innovation high up on the agenda in Australia, and what we have witnessed ever since is nothing less than remarkable. For example, in 2015, when Turnbull became PM, the AICC was hosting 6 delegations a year looking at the Israeli high-tech ecosystem, and that number grew to an expected 60 this year. I also wish to welcome our AICC colleagues, in particular from Sydney, New South Wales President Julian Siegel, CEO Michelle Bloom, and from Brisbane, Queensland President Bob Bishop, and CEO Simon White, and welcome all of the Chamber staff and our various supporters in both countries. I'd like to make a short comment about the current work of the IACC, which is needed to adapt in an era where international travel is restricted. We've been very active in conducting technology scouting and in-country support for numerous Australian companies, sharing with them the best that Israel, the innovation nation, has to offer. Please contact me or your local AICC chapter for further details. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Shai Daivari, who is the Israel Trade Commissioner based in Australia. I've personally known Shai for 15 years, where he commenced his career in the ministry and witnessed how he has progressed over the years, including being posted in Singapore and then became director of the Europe division. Shai is very much respected by his peers, industry, and is a great partner and friend of the AICC and AICC alike. Shai was offered a number of postings, but Australia was his first choice, which is a great compliment to us all, as we're all beneficiaries of that decision. Over to you, Shai.
Thank you, Paul, for this kind, friendly, and warm introduction. So indeed, my name is Shai Daivari. I'm the Israeli Trade Commissioner, managing the Commercial Investment and Business Cooperation Office at the Israeli Embassy in Australia. Our office works to promote business, commercial, and technological cooperation between Australian and Israeli businesses and corporates, spanning across the entire spectrum of the industry, while focusing on Israel's technology and innovation competitive edge, with cybersecurity certainly being a pivotal domain. In this important event today, that could not have come in a more pressing and relevant of times, like John, our colleague, have mentioned, we are very happy and excited to join hands with our friends and partners at the Australia-Israel Chamber of Commerce, AICCWA, as well as the Israel-Australia Chamber of Commerce, IACC, with you, Paul, in Tel Aviv. It is hence my pleasure to introduce to the audience our Israeli keynote speaker, Mr. Yigal Unna. Mr. Unna began his career in the field of cyber technology, enrolling as a captain in the lucrative 8200 intelligence unit, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with Israeli Army intelligence names, the 8200 is the IDF's intelligence unit, which is responsible for collecting signal intelligence and code decryption. It had been recognized as probably the foremost technical intelligence agency in the world, which stands on par with the American NSA, in everything except scale. In 1995, Mr. Unna had been recruited by the Israeli Domestic Security Agency, we call it the Shin Bet, where he held a series of senior management positions in the signals intelligence and cyber sectors, which combine intelligence and active operations, as well as strategic development and implementation of new technologies. Roughly 22 years after his service with the Israeli Security Agency, Mr. Unna joined the National Cyber Directorate, where he was tasked with setting up and leading the National Cyber Bureau's Cyber Technology Unit until his appointment as Director General in January 2018. Mr. Unna holds both an MBA as well as bachelor's degree in history and management, both from the Tel Aviv University. Yigal, I hope I gotten your resume correctly. I wish you, I welcome you, wishing you Boker Tov, giving you the stage, actually the screen, to share with us your thoughts and insights.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shai. Thank you, everyone. Shai, after this long introduction, I think I'm 180 years old, but I'm only 48 years old. It sounds too much. I need to recalculate my roots, I think. So thank you, Paul, John, everyone, for having me in your distinguished audience, distinguished event, webinar. Many times it seems like the actual events in the cybersecurity world are kind of a promo or PR events towards those kinds of seminars or webinars or conferences. But actually, it's not. Unfortunately, they are there. The cyber events are all the time, and with the webinars, without the webinars, and Australia and Israel are facing it as we speak, on a daily basis and on a growing curve. And that's what I want to emphasize or to talk about in a couple of minutes. Unfortunately, I wish I had the Israeli government response on the budget-wise as the Australian has after the events. We had a series of attacks over watering systems and other humanitarian computers or systems in the less critical but surrounding critical infrastructures in Israel. We're still fighting for the budget. Maybe Australia can drop some of its billion dollars. Think about that. But having said that, a couple of words of how Israel is looking at or approaching the cybersecurity problem or challenges. First of all, it's very important to define accurately what is cyber, because everything in the internet can be considered cyber, and it's not. We are focusing on two main definitions. First, cyber attack is gaining an unauthorized access to computer or network. Once you gain access, you can do whatever you want. You can spy, steal data without the owner of the data knowing that. You can change the data, causing real damage to the data, to the physical things that connected to it or run by this data. You can steal it, like money, data from a kind of money, and you can cause even influence attacks, and we see more and more of this kind. I'll talk about that. The other definitions, important definition, is understanding that cyber is not just about computers. We broaden the definition to ICT versus ICT, information communication technologies versus ICT, meaning that also GPS, jamming and spoofing, or any RF, what is usually referred as electronic warfare, is part of cybersecurity. And we see more and more military or army in the world convergence of the traditional electronic warfare with the cybersecurity, also in Israel and the US, I believe also in Australia. And that's a smart move because the two are really converged and linked, and one cannot work without the other. So ICT versus ICT, gaining unauthorized access, this is cyber attacks, not the all other atrocities that may happen in the internet. That's different parts and different agencies, by the way, that deal with that. Second is understanding the growing amount of this risk. You know that the World Economic Forum, those who run the Davos Summit, runs a global risk report every and for the last 3 or 4 years, the cyber risk is attributed by thousands of decision makers that apply to this survey, the number 5 or number 6 on the top list of the risks, but it's number 1 on the man-made risks. Now, what amazes is that there's an inverse relation between how high this risk is rated, number 1 in man-made, and how easy it to mitigate or to deal with it compared to the other risks, like terrorism, wars, political instabilities that are much more down on the list. So how we deal with the how high the risk is and how easy it's to mitigate it, something that we, governments, and all the human society on the liberal democratic side of the world are still fighting or trying to find the right point how to work. Now, basically, you can talk about a couple of remedies. The first remedy is minimizing the attack surface. It's not sexy. It's very, gray, but it's the most important and most effective way to handle it. But like as we see in the COVID-19 case, in epidemics, and by the way, we use the analogy of pandemics and epidemics way before this new thing came over to describe how to deal with cyber attacks, because they behave very, very similar to epidemics, to pandemics, only made by people and not by biological elements. So minimizing the attack surface goes with the biological pandemics as well as cyber pandemics. And every dollar we spend there can save $60 or $70 on the next phase or remedies that you need to take care once the first failed. Now, there's no hermetic solution, so you need also to invest in recovery, in detection, in attribution elements, in removal, and even in deception and thwarting techniques. Of course, all of them you can find in the Israeli cyber industry, just simple because we don't have any other choice. In Israel, we're under continuous attack all the time, and we need to build, first of all, agile, quick, effective and tools to mitigate with it. So that's why we have more than 500 cybersecurity companies, from Checkpoint to small startups that runs many innovative solutions all the time. But there's no single remedy or single medicine that can take care of that. You always need to take care of all the parts, minimizing the attack surface, taking care of detection, taking care of removal, and of course recovery. By the way, recovery, just think about ransomware. If we take care of a good recovery and good backups mean that are not infected with the ransomware agents, then we don't care if we attack or hacked or ransomed, because immediately we can turn on the backup, maybe lose a day or two of data, maybe even not if you do it smartly, and go on without any disruption. And it's, again, it's not sexy, it's not cyber warfare, but it's very effective. And the government, the Israeli government, is also taking care in the strategy to deal with that. Talking about strategy, first of all, we have the cybersecurity strategy since 2012, 8 years. Some may say, okay, now it's obsolete. 2012, it's like BC in cyber terms, before cyber. Well, no, it's still, we find it still relevant, still operational, and it's because it's very simple. It's based on 3 layers. First layer is what we call robustness, meaning minimizing the attack surface. We put a lot of efforts there. In analogy to COVID-19, it's social distancing, it's a differentiation between networks, etc. But as in the COVID-19, there's no one solution, so we need the second layer. Second layer, we call it resilience, meaning, okay, we're attacked, no hermetic solutions, as we said, but how fast we can detect, how early the detection of the attack is, how fast we remove the attackers from within whatever they manage to gain unauthorized access, and how strong we are standing on our feet even after the attack was removed. This is the part of this second layer. Third layer is remembering that, okay, it's not biological viruses, it's real human beings with any motivation, bad motivation, malicious motivation they have, national security, criminal, or any other, and you need to take care of the attackers, the human attackers. This is not the INCD mission. We have other agencies for that, military, police, Mossad, Shin Bet, other agencies, but we work very closely to make sure that those who are in our responsibility of damage are taken care in the right priority by the other agencies that are specializing in that. The first two layers are definitely in the INCD territory or responsibility. And this is the second part of the strategy. Having a strong federal agency, I believe in Australia you have the ACSC under the ASD, and not many countries have that. In fact, if you take a look at Europe, even our close friends in the US, too many agencies, different agencies, not a single point of decision-making or strategy leadership. Where you do have it, you see much more success in mitigating and dealing with the problem of cybersecurity, based on the national security and even criminal aspects. And in Israel, we have the INCD only in this format 2.5 years, but before that, since 2015, we had operational civilian cybersecurity agency reporting to the highest instance, to the Prime Minister himself, and dealing with all aspects of cybersecurity in the government and outside the government. Another part of the strategy, the third part, is how we deal with the vast majority of the firms, companies, civilians. We are regulators of only the critical infrastructures. We have a list of about 40 critical infrastructures. By the way, even the electricity by itself is not a critical infrastructure, but only specific systems within the electricity, the main electricity company in Israel, considered as critical infrastructures. But so what happened with all the rest of the Israeli cyberspace? There we work very closely with the regulators, the already existing regulators, meaning transportation, financial ministries, energy ministry, and others. We are already, like in Australia, you have strong regulators. They know their way around. They know who the internal politics in the financial sector, for example, all the banks. We have 11 or 12 major banks. I don't want to replace the already existing regulator that know his way around. I implanted a strong cyber unit within the already existing regulator. I guide them. I give them the doctrine. I tell them how to work. I even help them with the tools and intelligence. But they go under their own minister, and the regulated entities are facing only one regulator and don't need to deal with different regulators that may sometimes collide or make some conflicts. In this way, we immediately get in touch with the vast majority of the Israeli cyberspace. And the last part are the civilians that are not regulated, or other companies that are not under specific regulators. For that, we initiated the first, now we have copycats around the world, but we opened the first hotline for civilians. Any Israeli civilian can call 24/7. The hotline, in Israel, it's 119. It's like the 911, but on the opposite, we write from right to left. So it's 119, and get immediate response to any suspected cyber attack. Now, it's for everyone, it's for free. In some cases, we can take over remotely and help. In other cases, we deploy incident response teams to see if it's something that seems more suspicious, or national security, or first early signals of an epidemic that can erupt. And we do that not just to help the citizens. It's a great sensor, and we act like the CDC, the Control Disease Center. So we want to get as fast as we can to the first signs of an outbreak to contain it and to remove it before it spreads. And we use proactive measures to scan the Israeli cyberspace all the time to find open ports for a new coming exploits or vulnerabilities that are published. Once they're published, we want to be a little faster than anyone else and get in touch with those who have an open port or more vulnerable before their attack. That's why we call it proactive. We get in touch with them, we warn them, and we nudge them until we make sure that they close whatever need to be closed and they're secure. And that's why I mentioned that it's much more cost effective to invest in the first minimizing the attack surface than the aftermath. Last, for the description of what we do, is remembering that you cannot run a strong cybersecurity apparatus without a strong industry. And my agency is also responsible for promoting and helping the Israeli cybersecurity industry, which, as I hinted, is pretty good in the world. Most of my friends are there from our security background, and we help them, we challenge them, so they need to if they want to meet the highest challenge of the Israeli government, they need to sweat. But after they sweat, they develop tools that can be commercially sold or given to all the rest of the world. So we run this all the time, alongside with a strong ecosystem of human capital and strong academia. We have 7 excellence centers in the major 7 universities in Israel that already have more than 300 researchers, and it's all conducted and partly funded by us to make sure that they go on the right ways and they keep on going and being relevant. I think that's shortly what the Israeli strategy model, and we can continue from there.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Unna. Now, what we're going to try and do, and it was interesting in terms of what you touched on there, particularly with the disease control, the health aspects of cyber as well. So it'll something we might well come back to. Now, we have a slight challenge before us. We have to get Dr. Feakin on the line, and he is in as an attendee. Dr. Feakin, I'm going to unmute you now. If you can at least get connected. We have you on the line. Is that correct?
Hello, yes, I'm now on the line. Can you hear me?
Great, we can hear you, Dr. Feakin. Thank you so much. It's such a shame. I'm going to briefly introduce you. And I will say that you're one of the best looking ambassadors, surely, around the world. So it is a real shame that we don't have you on the screen. Oh, sorry, that was John. John's with us. Dr. Feakin is the Australian inaugural ambassador for cyber affairs, and now with the title Cyber Affairs and Critical Technology. Slight change, but also an important one, given the Australian the Australian Prime Minister today declared today is a pivotal day for Australia. Dr. Feakin was a member of the independent panel of experts that supported the Australian Cybersecurity Review to produce the Australian Cybersecurity Strategy in 2016. He was the Director of National Security Programs at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute from 2012 to 2016 and established the Institute's International Cyber Policy Centre. He's held research and advisory positions, including the Royal United Services Institute for Defence and Security Studies, the Oxford University Global Cyber Security Capacity Centre, the Global Commission on Internal Governance, and the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace. He holds an honours degree in Security Studies and a Doctorate of Philosophy in International Security Studies, both from the University of Bradford. Dr. Feakin, firstly, we welcome the floor for you to introduce particularly the International Cybersecurity Engagement Strategy and the comments from Mr. Unna.
Great, Chris, thank you. Firstly, flattery will get you everywhere. Thanks very much for the compliment. I'll bank that one and let everyone believe you because they can't actually see me. I think something we've all learned in the COVID-19 environment is that WebExes and video conferencing does have the propensity to go wrong now and again. Yigal, great to see you. Sorry you can't see me, but really good to see you. It's been a little while and really good to hear some of your insights. And it's also great to know that the PM's announcement has permeated globally, and not just in terms of some of the unfortunate cyber incidents that we're currently dealing with, which I will talk briefly about during my comments. But great to see you, Yigal. Hope you and the family are keeping well, and you and your team clearly doing fantastic work. I mean, often I'll start talking about cybersecurity by saying it's never been more important. It's never been more of a strategic issue than current setting. I think, you know, that statement, you can times that by 100 now when you think about what the outbreak of COVID-19 has done in terms of bringing into sharp focus how critical cyberspace is to the function of our everyday lives, both professionally and personally. We are in a process, I think, of digital acceleration that no one could have expected. I bet you a fair portion of the people on this line will have gone through digitization processes within their own businesses and organizations, which conceivably would have taken the next 5 years to get through, and they went through it in a matter of weeks. And I think that kind of acceleration is something that's not lost on any of us. But interesting as well when Yigal talks about the increased attack surface and trying to narrow the aperture of what you're doing in terms of a response activity. Well, there's no doubting that with that increased digitization and large portions of the workforce shifting online and working remotely, you can see how that attack surface has broadened into a whole range of different areas that weren't the case pre-COVID. And you know, just imagine any of us trying to deal with a COVID-19 style event right now without the internet. I mean, an argument that I often make is, you know, why would you link cyber and critical technology? Well, you know, cyberspace and the internet is pretty much the most critical technology we have as it currently stands. And if you think about all the technologies that are building off the back of that, well, we're finding ourselves in a period of rapid accelerated change in our technological environment, which we are trying to grapple with in so many ways. And I'll come on to that in a moment. But I think what has COVID-19 done, it's also brought into starker relief and focus the dark side, if you like, of cyberspace. And the increased importance of robust and resilient cybersecurity responses and approaches and vigilance to that evolving threat environment. Yigal, I won't try and compete with your awesome outline of the approaches that you're taking. I think perhaps though, talking about the threat environment that we're dealing with, you know, what have we seen in terms of that threat environment? What is it that has concerned us? Well, I think it's perhaps not so much the growth in cyber attacks, cyber incidents, and you know, the general safety of people online in terms, but it's more the retargeting and repurposing of efforts by especially criminals, but also state entities to take advantage of the gaps that COVID-19 has provided, or the opportunities, let's say, rather than the gaps. And I think, you know, one of the areas that we've been most concerned with has been the malicious cyber activity, which has specifically targeted the health sector. And it's pretty hard to wrap your head around, you know, that taking advantage of our most critical industries at a time when we need them the most. And also, again, as Yigal mentioned, we've seen certainly a refocusing of cyber actors using the pandemic to spread misinformation, disinformation about not only the virus itself, but also the responses of various countries. And you can see the kind of contestability that's rapidly emerging in the online environment. And it's become an ever increasing critical sector for the misinformation and disinformation that we've seen. using online media, social media, bots, targeted digital advertising to get their false narratives across. And, you know, in a time when the clarity and precision of information is not quite, but almost everything in a pandemic-like situation, you know, that has been a difficult situation for us to deal with. And certainly in the international environment, to be on the front foot and responding to these developments, you know, myself and the Australian government joined international partners to call out that unacceptable behaviour and encourage all countries to uphold their commitments to international law and norms in cyberspace. We registered our concern of that malicious activity at the UN, and, you know, publicised our view that, you know, the existing norms relating to intentionally damaging critical infrastructure should apply to medical services and facilities. You know, you can't think of any more critical facility infrastructure at this point, other than, you know, than medical services and facilities. And we also teamed up with the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. This position works hand in glove with the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. And we issued a joint statement urging countries to exercise increased vigilance and take reasonable measures to ensure such malicious cyber activities not emanating from their territory. And we think that those linkages are really important, where we can link up technical advisories with good, robust international messaging. You know, that's something that's really useful to everyone, because we can amplify messages and ensure that as broad a set of stakeholders get access to that technical data as possible, but also bring awareness to those countries and organizations that are perpetrating these acts, that we are onto them and not accepting of this. You know, we've also sponsored statements at the UN against the spread of disinformation in the wake of COVID-19. And I think, you know, when you see that statement being endorsed by 132 member states, including Israel, it shows you the lack of patience that countries have with that kind of activity. But, you know, more broadly, there's no doubt, and probably many of you on the line have heard this before, you know, what is cyber security? It's essentially a massive game of whack-a-mole, and I'm sure you've heard that cliche many times before, but it's just so true. And so it certainly doesn't stand still, the cyber threat environment. It's always on an evolutionary curve. And I do like Yuval's likening of the cybersecurity environment to a pandemic environment in so many ways, the way it morphs as a threat and evolves, the ecology, if you like, of the cyber threat environment, but also in terms of how you then respond to it. It's not an unhelpful analogy at all for us to be thinking about. Let me talk briefly about what we've been dealing with here in Australia. I mean, obviously, you would appreciate that there's only a certain degree of information I can provide, because it's an ongoing issue that we're dealing with. But you'll no doubt be aware that on the 19th of June, our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, announced that malicious cyber activity had been targeting Australian networks, a sophisticated state actor. And that it targeted a whole range of sectors, including all levels of government, industry, political organisations, education, health, essential service providers and operators of other critical infrastructure. That's quite a broad attack surface that we are identifying there, and the Prime Minister identified. You know, we're not attributing this activity to a specific actor at this time, but the immediate focus of the Australian Cybersecurity Centre and the excellent work they've been doing, and I really must commend the work that they've been doing there under the stewardship of Abigail Bradshaw, who's the head of the ACSC. But they've been really focused on, again, responding. Yigal, you've just set the tone so well. You know, how fast can you detect and respond, and how quickly can you recover? Well, the ACSC has been focusing heavily on securing networks, protecting victims, and conducting those ongoing investigations, and trying to enact responses as quickly as possible, you know, and pushing as much technical advice out there as possible, so that there are information sources out there to share, not only with our own private sectors, but with international partners, in order that they can all protect themselves against what we're seeing here. So moving on from that and talking a little bit about strategy, we also are having to respond to that ever-changing cyber environment. So, you know, what are we doing to tweak our national settings and make sure that our posture's fit for purpose and in the right place. We are literally at the moment in a, if you like, two different processes unfolding here in Australia. One of which is developing the 2020 cybersecurity strategy, which you will see being released in the coming months. It certainly builds on the very good foundations of the 2016 strategy, but we're well aware that neither our adversaries stand still, or neither should our responses to them. So, as you rightly mentioned, there's a fairly attractive sum of money that's been announced. 1.35 billion that was announced yesterday by the Prime Minister for the Australian Cybersecurity Centre and broader Australian Signals Directorate to address a whole range of different areas of practical work in cybersecurity and or broader cyber operational issues. But that will also incorporate the government's $156 million cyber resilience and workforce package. So those investments are of enormous significance to us all, and illustrate again the seriousness and focus that this government we rightly have on these issues. So for the 2020 strategy, we've been through a whole our Home Affairs Department have been preparing this strategy with a whole round of consultations. Hopefully you've all had a chance to talk about what should be in that strategy. It's a huge number of submissions, 200 written submissions plus. We've had consulted with over 1,400 people from across Australia. And it's really important that we get those voices included in our strategy in order that it's something that we co-own and deliver. It's a team sport, cybersecurity, and we are in this game together. Similar threats that would hit any sector could equally hit someone in their home, and it's in many respects it's interesting dealing with such a security issue, which you don't often get security issues which are so scalable and can affect pretty much every portion of societies. But through this strategy, the government's exploring options to strengthen our cyber capability, to protect the economy, raise our ability to respond and manage to cyber threats, and especially how we protect Australia's critical systems. So that will set the bar and the cadence for our work over the coming years. But what about our international approach? And I'll conclude on just a taster of what we're doing in the international space. So that, if you like, the concurrent process which feeds off of and plays into the cybersecurity strategy is that we're developing a cyber and critical tech international engagement strategy. It not only fits with the evolution of this position, but I'd be interested in Yigal's position on this as well, and many, I'm sure, in the audience that we have. But it's very rare now that you would have a conversation about cyber issues, cyberspace, without it rapidly evolving into a conversation around the broader digital environment, whether it be 5G, whether it be AI, whether it be blockchain, whether it be quantum computing. There's a whole raft of these technologies which are evolving very rapidly, and governments are investing enormous sums of money to position themselves at the forefront of the 21st century economy and geopolitical situation, and playing increasingly into the way that countries relate to one another. So this strategy is tasked with trying to identify what it is Australia wants out of that international environment. How does it want to shape that tech environment and the technology itself, so that we can make the most out of it across not only our national security interests, but our economic interests, and also what kind of societal impact some of these technologies are going to have. Some of you may know we had a 27 international cyber engagement strategy, but this will build on that to take a coordinated approach and comprehensive approach to the cyber and broader critical tech issues that now face us. We're really welcoming of views of how together we can influence the design, development, and application of current and emerging critical technologies in line with our values and collective interests. And particularly in regards to cooperation in international standard-setting organizations and multilateral discussions. So it just gives you a very brief taste. You can stand by this year for a flurry, those two strategies to come out. And I think, you know, if anything, what is it that we're learning so much from COVID-19? Well, it's how you do business faster and more effectively, and you know, often how do you take risks to come out with the best solutions possible. We are in unprecedented times. I know you may have heard that many times before, but I think that's interesting as policymakers and as operational communities in working out how we best respond to such a rapidly evolving technology space, cybersecurity space, and geopolitical space. And I think with that, I'll say thanks very much for listening to me, and sorry you didn't get to see my wonderful banners in the background, which are much better looking than I could ever be. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much, Toby, Dr. Feakin, for that. I thought just some simple takeaways, and I do want to give the audience the opportunity to ask some questions. We do have some here, and rather than waste any further time, we're running out of time very quickly. There's obviously a key contrast between Australia and Israel. Very interesting. Israel's strategy since 2012 is lasting you through, whereas the 2016 we've been sort of doing the 3 to 4 year strategies each time, but now we're starting to see through the defence aspect, they're starting to forecast out that 10-year period. So there's a bit of a contrast there, and I think we also have the international engagement strategy, again, as Dr. Feakin pointed out, where both national cybersecurity, but also our engagement with our region. I'm just going to open it up to a question here, and it does move in, particularly on the announcement yesterday and today in terms of Australian national defence and the alignment of cybersecurity to the defence portfolio. There's a question here: what kind of offensive capabilities are required for deterrence purposes and even to preemptively neutralise possible cyber threats? What would be the percentage breakdown in terms of those two? Now, I know it's always a difficult discussion around offensive and defensive cyber security, but what better way to ask than the Israelis, if we don't mind. Mr. Unna, your thoughts on the offensive side, given also current news that's coming out of between Israel and water, sewerage facilities being attacked as well.
Well, thank you, Toby, for the comments. And regarding this question, well, offensive is offensive word. So let me rephrase it. Okay, so my 31 years experience in cybersecurity, only the recent 4.5, 5 years are dealt with the defensive side of the equation. And I must say, before that, I was much more lookalike like Toby. Since I went to the defensive side, you see. So Toby, keep on your good job there. I must say that deterrence is really getting more bothering impact on all the liberal democratic governments, as we are more reluctant to use force on the same level that attacks are done by the bad guys against our civilian infrastructures, humanitarian infrastructures. And as you know, Israel has witnessed in the April, the end of April, a series of attacks or attempted attacks. They didn't manage to succeed in their malicious intention, but it made us deeper look into our deterrence strategy. Now, deterrence is not just offensive, let's say. Deterrence, first of all, is defensive, because if you are strong enough and you can show that any attempt against your crown jewels is foiled or thwarted, or in a way that causing the embarrassment for the attacker, and attribution that put the finger just in his face, etc., is something that we find very effective against this kind of threat actors. Basically, without mentioning specifics, hackers all around the globe, let's say, have this basic sentiment. They work behind the scenes, they work on the dark. Once you put the lights on them, or even the lights are getting close to them, they tend to run back to their holes and to get more less effective. So one of the basic deterrence elements are getting good projectors, good line lights that you can immediately open and focus on the right threat actors. As fast and strong and lighter than you can do that, you gain a pretty good deterrence. Now, if you can combine it with other measures, more proactive, more intrusive measures, then it's okay. But remembering that we can never do the same equilibrium. Okay, they attacked our watering system, let's attack theirs. It won't go, not with our set of values. So you need different values. And then what Toby mentioned is very important and getting more important, that the international community set up ground rules, not just on a paper, but with a solid enforcement measures. This is a long way to still go. We're far from there, but we're making the first good steps. It can be UN. Let's find more effective organizations or tools. Basically, my personal preference is economic sanctions or organization that can put restraints or punishment or sanctions or whatever goes outside the lines. Once we set the lines and we have the limelights and the good projectors and good information sharing, which is critical in cybersecurity, then we can push back and raise the price of the malicious attacks, and then we can get deterrence more and more.
Dr. Feakin, I know that you've discussed attribution in the past as well and have been quite on the forefront of this as well. Maybe just some comments there to Mr. Unna's interesting aspect in terms of defensive, more focus on that defensive approach and that attribution at the end of the day, but speed of attribution is also relevant, yeah?
Sure. Thank you. I think, that Yigal absolutely, an enormously important part of creating some kind of deterrence framework in cyberspace is about building cyber defenses. And certainly you'd know better than I, Yigal, but that's A, very, very expensive business, B, very time consuming, and C is just hard yards. As you said, you're still very good looking there, Yigal, don't worry, it's all good. But I can, I sympathize with that because it's the harder part of the equation. I think, often what's the old adage, the offensive or the attacker has the advantage in cyberspace. Well, I guess because it's cheaper and, you don't need quite as much, perhaps quite as much equipment and input to be able to deliver that as you do, resilient cyber defenses. So, you will notice in the money that's being invested and what we've outlined in public, a lot of it is going into cyber defenses for that exact reason. The harder we are to hit, the less likely an adversary is to come after us. And the more we can narrow the aperture of what we have to look at, again, to Yigal's point of going after, being able to get to an adversary as quickly as possible, that's where we want to be. If you can turn down the background noise as much as possible and concentrate on the stuff that's really doing you damage, well, then you're in a better place. On the broader question, though, of where does offensive cyber fit within all of this? Well, look, offensive cyber capability is something that multiple nations are developing at pace and scale. Something that we've talked about a lot in public about our offensive capability, where it's being deployed in certain theaters of war, and also of some of the aspects of the parameters of that capability. We've also explained a lot as a country in terms of our interpretation of international law, and that's just to set the parameters a bit more clearly as far as we're concerned, because what we do see are a whole range of nations who are who let's say talk a good game but tend to go back on words that they've put on the table, and so exploiting, if you like, a rather ill-defined area, running up to, if you like, the threshold of warfare, well, we've seen it. We've seen countless times, and so something we've done, and Chris, you asked, is around attribution, and as an international community, we're pretty well oiled now in sharing information and jointly calling out certain activities which we think go beyond certain thresholds. Attribution is incredibly difficult, yes, but it's not impossible, and is quicker now than it's been in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just I had a thought, and there's a number of questions here relating to industry, cybersecurity industry, and you talked about dialing down the noise. Naturally, obviously, that's also for national security and defence, but it's across the economy. I've got two questions here, and I might come back to you, Dr. Feakin, in terms of where is the Australian government in terms of these recent announcements in funding at a national security and defence level? Where do you see that is going to dovetail into the local cybersecurity industry? And Dr. Unna, I'll put you on notice for the question of ASD here in Australia has sort of the body certifying cybersecurity credentials and the sector as well in terms of who supplies government and the vendor side, where maybe you might need to outline how that works. And you did talk about it in your strategy somewhat, but just how at your end in terms of the engagement with the cybersecurity industry and building up. One of the key areas I wanted to touch on was that capability building at the national level, at the industry level. So Dr. Feakin, in terms of this recent funding and what it might mean for the local cybersecurity industry?
Well, I mean, firstly, and Chris, you know, I've spoken at events with you before where, you know, we've tried to create more of an Australian industry focus. There is no doubt that the Australian cybersecurity SME market has grown considerably over the last 3.5 years. It's more visible. It's showing a lot of muscle in what it can do, and it's genuinely winning more contracts globally, not just here. So with an amount of money like that, and I can't speak on behalf of ASD and where they're going to spend that money, but invariably there are going to be opportunities because cybersecurity is a team sport, and we need a robust cybersecurity industry, which I think we have one which has grown immensely and is an incredibly capable industry to assist in building our cybersecurity, and not just for government, but also for broader infrastructure delivery firms and, you know, nationwide. So I think there's going to be an abundance of opportunity within that kind of money, and that's not just money that's a one-off investment. It's spread over 10 years, so that's, you know, quite an investment over a decade in our cybersecurity, and that will absolutely throw up opportunities. You know, we've just some of the figures. I mean, you know, over $35 million to deliver a new cyber threat sharing platform to enable us to share information better with industry and government. $12 million towards the new strategic mitigations and active disruption options to ensure that we can prevent malicious cyber activity from reaching millions of Australians. 118 million for ASD to expand its data science and intelligence capabilities. You know, the list goes on, and you can find all of those now. It's all being put out there in public. So there are opportunities out there, that is no doubt. So I'm glad that the numbers have resonated strongly with the community writ large. And I'm glad that that is perceived as an opportunity for companies to invest and grow with us in the way that we deliver cybersecurity in this country.
Mr. Unna, your take on the Israeli cybersecurity private industry, I suppose, and we're still seeing startups being well funded, going through Series A funding in Israel, and obviously your sort of to market is slightly different in Israel than it is here in Australia. How do you see it?
Well, thank you, Chris. First of all, if you find troubles with how to spend all this money, the Australian side, maybe Israel can, you know, join forces and work together. We can use some of it.
The Israel Trade Commission is here.
We'll have the exchange rate somewhere. Look, bear in mind that the best cyber intelligence agencies in the world today are not the governments, not the Israeli government, not the US, big freelancers, entities. These are the private sector. Like, I don't want to do free commercial, but you know, FireEye, CrowdStrike, McAfee, and many, many others. Now, they all have, you know, hundreds of millions of agents working all around the globe and collecting data. So when you talk about APT10 or APT33 or such nicknames, bear in mind that it's a commercial nicknames that given by commercial companies. So it's not about if to work, whether to work with the industry. It's only how to work. You cannot ignore them. They are stronger. They are bigger, and fortunately, they are on the good side of the equation. At least the vast majority of them. So in Israel specific, we have our basic strategy, basic philosophy, and in cyber, I think Toby mentioned that it's the right way. It's by the way, it's not all around the globe. We still find many countries that are reluctant, but you need to open up. Now, to open, it should be about sharing and cooperation, strong cooperation between agencies, naturally, leaving the ego outside the ecosystem. It's between countries, of course, between private and public sectors, and even between NGOs. This is kind of cooperation, and we need a new paradigm, a new approach how to work with the industry, with the commercial side of the equation. It's not just a customer, client, provider, vendor relations. It should be working together, in meaning that in some cases the government need to give something to the industry rather than money. It's best practices, even sometimes intelligence, to make them better, because how good they are have immediate implication of how good the national cybersecurity is. So it's a new approach. It's not us versus them. It's working together with a different set of rules, with a different paradigm, a new paradigm, and not just this kind of vendoring, selling to the government thing.
Well, look, I think even just your time, something like this and this engagement at this level, both yourself and Dr. Feakin, it is appreciated, and it could be just as simple as having a conversation and getting your thoughts and insights, and even just meeting you, even if on a virtual environment. Now, we are down into the final minutes, and there's been a number of questions around technology. You know, blockchain is mentioned, robotics and the like, and I had it on my sort of series here in terms of the thoughts of the future of cyber, in terms of industry 4.0, space 2.0, and move into we're in a DC during COVID, and we're moving into an after COVID and AC environment. The world's changing before our eyes, as both of you have outlined. We're obviously taking a lot of takeaways from the current health situation. Just a couple of minutes each, closing comments on the future of cyber in terms of key industries and space, and as Toby's title now is critical technology. Maybe start with you, Mr. Unna.
Well, we can talk for hours about that, but let's see. The attack surface is on steroids. It's growing up in a ways that we imagined, but not in this speed or pace. In Israel, we have what we call the purple certificate, the COVID-19 certificate, that if you follow specific rules, you can open your business or anything else to work as normal as you can. We need to get this purple certificate on the cybersecurity worldwide. We need, I think that we will get there sooner, couple of single years to come, that every person, of course, every business, corporate, agency, any entity should be need to hold this kind of certificate, and we need international system to update it and to make sure what are the right substance of this certificate in order to conduct business, in order to connect to the internet, in order to connect to one another through blockchain, through all the AI, 5G, all the curses that you mentioned. And we need to get there as fast as we can. Again, it will not be hermetic, but it will minimize the danger, the risks, to a level that allow us to keep on the right way of digitalization, of modernization, of more speed in connectivity.
Yeah. Dr. Feakin, it sounds like slightly heading towards potential regulation in terms of a requirement. Your thoughts on as a closing comment?
I'm not going to, if I may, I'm going to dodge a regulation question and just give you a bit of a grandstand for the end, if that's all right. Hopefully this will just leave everyone with a bit of a flavor of how we're thinking about it. Look, the internet over the last 30 years, which is a relatively short space of time, has revolutionized our lives professionally, personally, and in every way that we communicate and we conduct ourselves. And I genuinely believe right now that we are at one of those pivotal moments in history, where rarely in history, when you look back, do you see so many game-changing technologies maturing at a similar rate. And most of them that we're going to see maturing at the moment are going to feed off of what the internet has provided us with, that connectivity, and especially the data that is now provided through that medium. And those technologies that feed off of that infrastructure, whether it be 5G, and AI I use is a very broad term. There's so much to unpick in that. Quantum computing, and even developments in biotech, which will feed off big data sets that are emerging. Seeing the convergence of all of those technologies, which are maturing at a very similar pace, is tremendously stimulating as an opportunity, because those that position themselves at the forefront of those developments will be at the forefront of the 21st century economy as we get towards 2050 and beyond. But also it creates some massive headaches in how we then deliver what it is we want from a national security perspective. And the final part of that equation is if ever we thought that our interaction with the private sector was important, boy, is it even more important now, because a majority of that development stream is going to happen out there in the private sector. And we don't, most of us probably won't realize how advanced some of the different technology areas as it currently stands. So the impetus is on us to try, as governments, to try and get a clearer handle on that and try and enable both the technology cycle to work, but also for that technology not to, if you like, become something that we don't want it to be, and impact our interests across that whole spectrum of national interest and our own societal interest, so that it impacts us negatively. Get ready. The 21st century is already an exhilarating ride, but you haven't seen anything yet when we see all of these technologies mature and go forward. So maybe I can leave everyone with that.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of myself and MySecurity Media, I'm an optimistic pessimist. So say, as Dr. Feakin said, I think hang on, it's going to be a roller coaster ride. With that, I'm going to hand over to Paul Israel to give a vote of thanks. I do apologise we didn't have Dr. Feakin on video and for starting slightly late, but that is the virtual environment that we live in. And over to you, Paul, if you don't mind, giving a vote of thanks. And thank you. Lovely to meet you, Mr. Unna. And good to speak to you as always, Dr. Feakin. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks to Dr. Feakin and Mr. Unna. It's been a really interesting event. Normally we think of cyber, normally the speakers aren't that engaging or charismatic, and it was really fascinating to listen to you both. We touched on a lot of really important topics, and talking about strategy, the comments on deterrence, putting lights on the threat, those who make the threats was really important. I think the most important thing was the values, and both of you alluded to that the attackers don't have any values, attacking places like the health sector, but you as government players do act on a different playing field altogether. So I want to keep that very short. Chris, thank you again. I think you moderated really, really well. Thank you, John. And thank you, everyone, for your time on this webinar. All the best. Shalom.